The French speed demon has arrived. Hello, I am Xarkun and this is World of Warships Legends. Today we're going to take our first look at the new French legendary tier destroyer Kléber. We'll go over my mod selection, my commander choice. I'll also give you an alternative commander choice that I think will ultimately be more popular. Then, as usual, we'll jump into some gameplay, talk about the ship stats and how it plays. We'll skip the armor viewer though. This thing has 19 millimeters of plating everywhere. Typical destroyer armor. Mod selection, aiming systems mod 1 in the first slot, propulsion in the second, concealment in the third, and I've ultimately stuck with torpedo reload mod in the fourth slot. Now my commander choice is Louis Violet. As you can see, I've got him on a more torpedo focused build aside from his last skill in the fourth row, sidestep, which increases gun range. Now, if I were going to use a Bueno, this is the build I would use, and as you can see, it's pretty much identical to Violet, aside from that last skill, which increases the speed. Not bad, but I do feel like I want to spec a little bit into the guns on the Kleber, and I'll tell you why once we get there. First up, though, in the stats department, the Kleber has 21,900 hit points, which is a pretty robust hit points pool for a destroyer. Puts it in the same league as the Khabarovsk at the legendary tier. Also, like the Khabarovsk, the Kleber has 8 guns. They are a little bit bigger than the Khabarovsks at 139 millimeters in size, and they're set in 4 double turrets, 2 on the front and 2 on the back. The base range is 11 kilometers, which is pretty standard, but I've got that range up to 12.3 with Violet's sidestep skill and the epic booster of battle propensity flag, and I do like having a little bit of the extra range. Now, the thing that sort of disqualifies this destroyer from being a pure open water gunboat HE spamming destroyer like the Khabarovsk is the base reload time on these guns. It's 7 seconds, which is fairly slow. Now, you could get that down a little bit more if you really want to spec into the gun performance, perhaps using the main battery reload booster mod in the fourth slot rather than the torpedo reload mod like I've chosen. But if you use that main battery reload mod, you're going to increase the turret traverse speed, which is already kind of sluggish at 18 seconds, and you're not going to have anywhere near the same range that you would have on the Khabarovsk. And having a long range on these open water type gunboat destroyers like the Khabarovsk is, in my mind, essential. So this really isn't an open water gunboat type destroyer. Nevertheless, even with the slow reload time, the guns are pretty effective. They've got a 2,000 max HE damage alpha strike, which is excellent, and a 10% chance to start a fire. And these things do seem to start fires left and right if you're really shooting them. They've also got 2,700 maximum AP shell damage, and the AP, as on other French destroyers, is very effective. It's perfectly capable of citadelling cruisers, even at slightly longer ranges than you would expect. The torpedoes, though, that's where this ship really starts to get crazy. It's got 12 torpedoes in 4 triple launchers, 2 set on either side of the ship. So you can launch them from one side, as I did at that Alaska over there, and flip around and launch them from the other side. That's a scary amount of torpedoes in the water, particularly since they do an average of 18,400 damage, which is very high. I think it's only beaten out in terms of alpha strike by IJN destroyers like the Shimakaze at the legendary tier. The torpedoes have a relatively short range at 8 kilometers, but with the Albert Gleaves inspiration I have on my commander build, I've got that range up to 8.4 kilometers, which, that's fine. The speed on these things, though, these are Screamer Torps, 75 knot base speed, 79 knots on my build. Essentially, same characteristics as Les Fantasques torpedoes before they nerfed it, which is an interesting observation to make. They nerfed Le Fantasque at tier 7, and then they added this at the legendary tier, which has pre-nerf Le Fantasque torpedo stats, but also 3 more torpedoes than Le Fantasque had. So, yeah. Anyway, the torpedoes are quite effective, but like with many other high-damage, high-speed torpedoes, i.e. Japanese torpedoes, they are quite conspicuous. 1.8 km detectability by sea. Let's pause briefly to talk about the AA stats on this ship, although I don't think the AA stats are all that relevant because I never seem to see high-tier games that contain aircraft carriers. I don't know if that's because people find aircraft carriers kind of boring to play. At this point, I think I do, and I think that is a significant factor in why you don't see so many. But also, I feel like the Legends player base really hasn't gotten the hang of carriers, let's just say, and every time I see one in a battle, the only thing I'm worried about is them spotting me in a destroyer, not necessarily dropping me. Nevertheless, the AA on the Kléber is pretty anemic. It's only got 8 AA guns. They have a 4.5 km range, so they're only the long-range anti-aircraft guns. And they do an average of 102 damage per second, which on paper seems alright, but I'm pretty sure that these AA guns are not going to be very useful at all in defending you from airborne strikes. Also, you don't have a smoke screen to disengage, so carriers are probably a little bit more dangerous to this destroyer and French destroyers in general, just because of their ability to keep them permanently spotted, than they are, other destroyers, which can disengage with the use of a smokescreen. Let's pause for a minute before we go into any more stats. Take a look at this Chapayev. We're pretty close to him, 5.7 kilometers. He's broadside to us. We fire with the armor piercing, and take a look at that. A Citadel for 7,800 damage. It was only 2 Citadels, but I'm sure you could get more. And, of course, you do have the main battery reload booster consumable. Now, you only get 1 of them, which is kind of disappointing. I wish at the legendary tier you could get 2 of them. That would be nice, at least, so you could have 1 more chance than the tier 7 French destroyer Le Fantasque. Seems like a reasonable upgrade to me. I wish they would implement it. But that reload booster and the good characteristics of this AP, plus the concealment and the speed, let's talk about those. The speed, 45 knot base speed, but with the French speed boost, which I think lasts for about 2 minutes and increases the destroyer's speed by 20% instead of the typical 8%, you can get this thing going at 54 knots, at least with my build. Now, if you spec into speed with Commander Inspirations or use a Boyano's last skill in the 4th row, you can probably get this thing in excess of 55 knots, which is absolutely blistering crazy, and certainly by far the fastest destroyer in the entire game. 740-meter turning circle, though, which is pretty wide for a destroyer, and 4.8-second rudder shift time, which is quite respectable, although I've increased that with the sidestep skill on Violette to 5.3 seconds. Kind of sluggish, but ultimately it's a trade-off I'm willing to take. And the concealment on this thing, base 6.9 km. I've got it down to 5.3 with my build, and you can certainly get it down lower. I've seen people with it down to 4.7, 4.8 kilometers, basically IJN torpedo boat territory, and there is something to be said for the value of that. Although in order to do it, I think you'd have to use a Boyano as your commander and take the Fragile Threat skill, which is going to cut down on your hit points, and that is also not something I would want to do in this ship, especially since it doesn't have a smoke screen, and the only way you can disengage with it is to run away. Although, to be fair, it's very good at that, because there is nothing fast enough in this game to catch it, and if you use that speed boost to run away, you'll be well outside your detectability range in no time, and you can really escape from most threats if you find yourself in a sticky situation, as long as you aren't, too close to whatever the threat is. If it's something like a Cleveland or a high DPM light cruiser that you get too close to, well, things can get ugly real quick. In any case, how does this destroyer play? Well, I was alluding to it a little bit earlier after that citadel on the Chapayev. This is, in my mind, sort of an ambush-type destroyer. The torpedo range is rather short, but rather quick. So you're always going to be launching the torpedoes pretty close to the target, and you have a lot of torpedoes to put in the water. Basically, you almost come equipped with a built-in torpedo reload booster consumable in the same way that the Tier 6 American destroyer Benham does, only your torpedoes are much faster and much harder hitting than the Benhams. So, this is very much sort of an ambush-type destroyer where you can use its very, very good speed to get into unexpected positions quickly, launch your torpedoes from one side of the ship, flip around, launch them from the other, and run away, utilizing your speed. Hopefully your torpedoes hit whatever you've thrown them at. Hopefully they cause a flood, and then at that point, you can use the Kleber's excellent high explosive gun characteristics to farm a little bit of damage off battleship superstructures, actually sometimes quite a lot of damage. 2,000 HE Alpha Strike is pretty gnarly, and then the 10% fire chance, you're likely to start some fires on your way away from the target. So that's sort of how I would recommend playing this thing, and that's kind of why I wanted to spec more into the guns. Essentially, you launch your torpedoes, you kite away, and then you farm some damage with the guns while it's safe. Now, against other destroyers, this is not necessarily the most effective gunboat, due mostly to the rather slow reload time. But if you do find yourself in a situation where you're fighting an enemy destroyer, these guns do a lot of damage. I have sent single salvos against destroyers for like 3,500 damage. The Alpha Strike on these guns is great, and you can reduce the reload time with the reload booster consumable and get some crazy just burst damage on any destroyers, which makes you a threat to even gunboats like the Khabarovsk or the Gearing or the Tier 7 destroyers like Fletcher and Akizuki. You can go toe-to-toe to them with that main battery reload booster consumable, although your rate of fire while that consumable is active, I think, is still going to be slower than pretty much all of those destroyers, but at the same time, your Alpha Strike is much higher. It's higher even than the Khabarovsks. So, like I said, I think this is sort of an ambush-type destroyer where you really want to get these torpedoes involved because they're so very good. And then you want to use the guns sparingly at opportune moments, particularly when you're kiting away from ships in order to start fires, to follow up on floods that your torpedoes cause, or if you can position yourself in such a way where you've got the broadside of a dangerous light cruiser like the Chapayev, there's no doubt in my mind that you can open up with the AP, pop that reload booster, and Citadel one to death in short order, probably before they can really even respond to you with the firepower that they carry. So it's a fun, sort of unique play style. It's very unlike the Khabarovsk, very unlike the Gearing, and very unlike the Shimakaze. It's definitely its own thing. It's probably not the easiest destroyer to play because it does not have a smoke screen, so you do have to be very careful about your positioning, and you do have to, at all times, keep in mind that you want to have an escape route planned in case you do get spotted, because being spotted, your only choice is to run away. And that, by the way, is another argument for using Violette, especially with my torpedo launching / kiting away farming strategy that I sort of laid out here. If you have Violet, his base trait reduces the amount of time it takes for you to go unspotted after firing your guns. Typically that time is something like 20 seconds, and I think with the rank 16 Violet build that I have here, I've got it down to maybe 14, 15 seconds, which, 5 seconds isn't a lot, but it can often be the difference between eating a salvo from a cruiser or not because you've gone unspotted. So another good reason I think to use Violet. In short, I think this is an incredibly powerful ship. Saw a picture of a survey that Legends conducted on social media asking people if they were more excited for the Worcester or the Kleber. 66% said the Worcester over this ship, but frankly, I don't know why. This might be, honestly, the strongest destroyer at legendary tier. And you know how I was talking about that burst damage versus other enemy DDs? Well, take a look at this if you want to see that point proven. Holy crap, this Udachi is melting under this withering hail of fire, and when he dies, the game will end with our victory. We also got 3,000 base XP in this game, which is quite nice, although the damage wasn't, super high, 140k in that area, but pretty dang good game with the Kleber. Extremely effective destroyer, potentially the most powerful at the legendary tier that we've yet seen. Some people are probably going to say it is overpowered because of these torpedoes, which are excellent, and maybe there's a case to be made for that. Again, it's not the easiest destroyer to play. I think it's got a fairly high skill floor or whatever you call it, but it's a lot of fun. It's a unique play style, and I like it quite a bit. I would highly recommend, if you're going to choose between the Kleber and Worcester, I would highly recommend you choose this one and give it a try, because it is really fun. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.